I'll call this virtual meeting to order of the Planning Advisory Committee. All participants are asked to keep microphone on mute and cameras off during staff presentations and committee discussions. Participants wishing to speak to an application during the public meeting portion of this meeting will be called on by name one at a time during the public meeting. At that time, the participant called on may unmute their microphone and turn on their camera if they wish to speak. If you wish to speak to and receive further notice regarding an application and have not signed in to the recording secretary, please speak now. Public participants will receive another sign-in opportunity when the public meeting portion of this meeting is called to order. I'm John Wanless, Chairman of the Planning Advisory Committee. I will now take attendance of our committee members and staff. Please raise your hand or declare your presence when I call your name. Bill Curry. Jacqueline Grimes.
Present.
Councillor Wendy Alford.
Present.
Bill Winmeyer.
Present.
Jack Anderson.
Here.
Councillor Jay Brennan.
Present.
Senior Planner Carl Grinke.
Present.
Planning Coordinator Mary Remig.
Present.
To review, committee members are asked to raise their hand when they wish to speak. Alternatively, please find an appropriate opportunity at any available time to notify the chair verbally if you wish to speak. Item 2 on the agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Bill, seconded by Jack. All in favor? Carried. Item number 3, adoptions of minutes. We have 2 sets of minutes here to adopt. The first one we'll do is the advisory committee meeting on June the 10th, 2021. Moved by Jay, seconded by Jack. All in favor? Carried. The second is the Planning Advisory Committee meeting of June the 24th, 2021.
It looks good.
Moved by Bill, seconded by Jacqueline. All in favor? Carried. Item number 4, disclosure of any monetary interests. Item number 5, we'll now move into the public meeting. I'll open the public portion of this meeting of the Planning Advisory Committee meeting. Please be advised, you may leave this meeting at any time. Applicants, agents, members of the public logged into Zoom to participate in this public meeting are asked to please keep their microphones on mute and cameras off until called on by the chair. If you wish to speak to an application and have not signed in with the recording secretary, please speak now. The purpose of this Planning Advisory Committee meeting is to consider the minor variance application for MV-21-03 for 17 to 23 Beckwith Street North. The application seeks approval for a minor variance to the town zoning bylaw to allow for a reduction in the parking space requirements from 1.25 spaces per residential unit to 1 space per residential unit. Parking spaces will be supplied both on and off-site with will accommodate the construction of a residential addition to the existing commercial development located on the property. This meeting is your opportunity to provide any feedback on this application, and the Planning Advisory Committee welcomes any questions and comments you may have. We encourage you to do so at this public meeting, as the Planning Act rules suggest that the public's ability to voice objections later in the process may be limited if a written or oral comment is not submitted. The Planning Advisory Committee is the approval authority for minor variance applications. The committee will review the applications and any comments or concerns from the public to inform their decision for the minor variance application. The committee may choose to make a decision on the minor variance application this evening. I will now pass the meeting over to our senior planner, Carl Granke, to report on the notification and summary of application MV-21-03. Following his presentation, I will call on public participants one at a time to offer feedback, comments, or questions regarding the proposal. I also offer applicants in attendance an opportunity to address any concerns brought to the committee by the public. Carl.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dave, if you can open up PowerPoint, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Carl Granke, Senior Planner with the town, for those who I haven't met, and I'm going to review the application that's before the committee this evening. Next slide, please. So this application is for the property on sort of mid-block between William and Main Street on Beckwith Street North. It's the single-story commercial plaza known as the Rideau Heartland Center. It's about a 480 square foot lot. So the applicant, the owner of the property, proposes to construct a second-story addition to the existing commercial building. So that second-story addition would contain 6 residential units, a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units between about 700 square feet and 800 square feet. Each unit would actually have a private deck overlooking to the south, overlooking the roof of the TD building. So the property is zoned general commercial, and the general commercial zone actually allows upper story residential development. The lower level commercial would be retained, and the zoning bylaw establishes a number of requirements for upper story residential development, and this application complies in terms of density, unit size, and the various other provisions. But where it doesn't comply is the parking, which is in a different part of the zoning bylaw, and the bylaw requires 1.25 parking spaces per residential unit. So that would be a total of 7.5 rounded to 8 for this. So in this case, the proponents are proposing to provide a total of 6 parking spaces, 3 of them at the back of the lot, and then 3 of them behind a neighboring property that was recently purchased by the applicant. So the zoning bylaw allows these required parking spaces both on site and on a neighboring lot, so long as there's a binding agreement to ensure the parking spaces are retained. So the parking spaces right now are considered commercial spaces. The applicant advises that they're not generally used. Certainly they are tucked away in there, so they likely would not be too attractive for sort of short-term parking. But the zoning bylaw actually allows, as of right, reductions in commercial parking through a cash in lieu, through the payment of a cash in lieu of parking requirement, which would and that cash would go into a parking reserve that the town maintains for parking upgrades and improvements. And that's how they're proposing to address the conversion of the residential parking or the conversion of the commercial parking to residential. So they wouldn't need a minor variance for that, but they would need approval of that cash in lieu. That would be a condition of this hearing if approved. Next slide, please. So this is the site plan that's been provided with the application. It shows the building on Beckwith Street, the 3 proposed parking spaces that are accessed, and these are the 3 proposed residential parking spaces, currently commercial parking spaces that are accessed through an existing right-of-way across a neighboring property, and then the 3 parking spaces intended for the residential development at the back of 7 William Street East, which is owned by the same owner. Next slide, please. So this is just a preliminary elevation of the side of the building facing the TD Bank, showing that upper level that's proposed for residential development. It would be reasonably tall at the front and then sort of slope down to provide drainage towards the back. Next slide, please. And there's the conceptual floor plan. The building is proposed to be flush with the 2-story residential commercial mixed-use building next door. There wouldn't be any windows there. It would just be a hall along the side with windows facing Beckwith Street and then overlooking the TD building. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the public meeting, of course, is to involve the community in considering a change in the land use rules for that land. So just to reiterate, the upper story residential complies with the zoning, but what's being requested here, and it would be subject to site plan control. Certainly that would be, if approved, we'd be entering into a site plan agreement with the owner. But what the variance is seeking is approval for the reduced parking. And it's an opportunity for neighbors and the community to ask questions and provide feedback. And also I see that the agent representing the property owner is in attendance at this meeting as well, and she can respond to feedback as well. So the notification was undertaken in accordance with the Planning Act requirements. We notified all abutting property owners within 394 feet of the property, posted on site, and circulated agencies 10 days before the public meeting. Next slide, please. So we have received we've received feedback at the time of the preparation of this of the presentation. We've heard from the Public Works Department. They do not object to the removal of the parking spaces from the property. They feel that sufficient parking capacity exists on the street to support commercial development, and servicing stormwater management would be addressed through the site plan approval, not as a part of this variance application. So the clerk's office advises that we will be offering a daily parking permit plan for the municipal lot at the intersection of William East and Market Street. So we can't guarantee, at this point, we can't guarantee spaces for any particular user. They're first come, first served, but the clerk's office feels that they don't object to the application, and it appears likely that there will be sufficient space. We did hear from an abutting property owner this afternoon who had, and I believe that feedback was provided to the committee, whose principal concern was the potential impact of construction vehicles along that right of way, and essentially protecting the surrounding, the neighboring structures, and ensuring that they aren't damaged through the construction. The feedback did not articulate an opposition to the principle of the proposal, but certainly looking for a level of comfort about the impact on the impact of construction. Next slide, please. So with the minor variance application, it needs to meet 4 tests that are set out in the Planning Act. So the committee needs to be satisfied that it conforms to the general intent of the official plan, the general intent of the zoning bylaw, is the use is desirable and appropriate for the land, and is the application minor in impact. Next slide, please. So the official plan designates the property as downtown core. It certainly encourages a reasonably higher level of density of development, and also plan to provide a vibrant and human-scaled environment with a range of uses providing support for active transportation. The OP supports commercial development on the lower level, but supports residential on the upper level, and certainly supports a range of development that increases the vibrancy of activity. The downtown core is our cultural and economic core, and certainly it's a place where we want people to be. The plan also designates the area along Beckwith Street as a targeted growth area, and the targeted growth area policies of the plan support redevelopment, infill, and growth in centralized locations to support existing services and create vibrant streetscape. So in this case, the proposed development doesn't overbuild the site. We're simply adding a second story, and it seems that it is a compatible and a compatible development that's consistent with that intent. The plan doesn't get into too much detail about parking, but it does specify within the downtown core policies to balance the need for parking to support a thriving downtown with the need to minimize the impacts of parking upon a vibrant pedestrian and urban environment. So I think that clearly articulates an intent that we don't want to see a huge amount of surface parking, perhaps underutilized surface parking in the downtown core. We want to make sure there's enough parking so that to protect, to manage impacts on street parking, but we don't want so much that we're removing some of the development and vibrancy of the downtown core. So I think with 1 parking space per residential unit, I think this that balance is appropriately struck on this application. Next slide, please. So the zoning bylaw, of course, is intended to minimize the pressure of on-street parking for residents and guests. So it is a one-size-fits-all policy. It is that same 1.25 parking spaces applies across the board, regardless of whether it's a bachelor unit or a 4-bedroom unit. And it doesn't depend on location. So when we're looking at reductions to it, we broadly need to look at the area. Is this an area that's where they need excess parking? Are there facilities, are there amenities that they can walk to? Are there bike paths or sidewalks or other active transportation options that people can get around without using a car? And certainly in the downtown core, that is what we've been looking at. So in 2018, the town did undertake a downtown parking utilization study. It demonstrated that parking occupancy in this vicinity was fairly high. So usually in the range of 40 to 60% on average within these parking spaces, closer to 80 to 90% on sort of those peak times in the late afternoon. So that's not, that doesn't demonstrate that there's a shortage of parking. It does appear that there is sufficient parking, and the parking that is there turns over fairly quickly. It's generally used as short-term parking. So it seems that by reducing the parking on site, in any excess parking, visitor parking, anything above the 2 hours, there are other opportunities throughout the downtown quarter located. And I think it's important that there are appropriate cycling amenities available on both sides of the street as well. Next slide, please. So broadly speaking, and looking at the whether this application is desirable and appropriate, I think the intensification in this case does have the effect of filling in the streetscape. There's a lot of 2-3 story buildings on Beckwith Street. It is our historic downtown main street, and certainly an extra story to accommodate a permitted land use would be consistent with what the plan envisions as appropriate development. It's also important to note that that the town did recently undertake a housing study undertaken by the Housing Task Force, and they created 17 recommendations to improve housing supply and affordability in the town. And one of those recommendations was to look at reducing the residential parking requirements. The 1.25 was identified through that report as a bit of a barrier to creating affordable housing opportunities, certainly in key areas where we want to do that. So that's going to be looked at through the upcoming zoning bylaw review, and there's no guarantee of how that's going to ultimately apply on this particular property or any properties. But I think it demonstrates the intent, the town's intent through the Housing Task Force to look at parking as a potential solution to creating and enabling housing opportunities. Next slide, please. So the final test is this application minor in impact and nature? So the feedback from departments suggests we're not considering operational impacts. The conceptual development is appropriate in terms of scale, character, and density to the site. If approved and if built out, what's presented to us appears to fit in quite well with the Main Street fabric, and certainly there are existing structures nearby, and through the development process, through the site plan and building permit process, the applicant will be required to work with his architect and engineers and his general contractor to ensure that surrounding buildings are appropriately protected with minimal impact. Next slide, please. So it's the recommendation of staff that this application complies with the 4 tests outlined in the Planning Act, and we recommend that the committee approves the variance application, subject to the condition that the owner enters into an agreement to provide cash in lieu of the removed commercial parking spaces on the subject and applicable adjacent properties. And that would be looked at through the upcoming site plan control application. And the site plan control application will look more specifically at design and all of those other technical pieces that we want to make sure that the development really does fit in. So I'll conclude there, and I'll let the chair take over the rest of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. We'll begin hearing from members of the public. All comments and questions need to be addressed through the chair. If you have, excuse me, if you have signed in to the recording secretary and have requested to speak to this application, I will call on you by name one at a time to offer your feedback. We have no members of the public with us. So I'm gonna pass things over to Tracy Zander. Hi, Tracy.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Good. I think I'm Tracy Zander from Zander Plan for recording purposes. I'm representing the applicant here. I think your planners covered this very thoroughly. I don't really have anything to add. This certainly is a good example of intensification in your downtown area, and all of your policies really support this proposed use. And I think the parking request, which is really the nature of the minor variance application you have before you, is appropriate here. I'm consistent with your housing study and your policies. So I think one parking space per unit makes sense for this proposed use, and we've worked with your staff to find some solutions to deal with parking on the abutting property and the cash in lieu of parking for the commercial spaces that will be lost. Your staff did forward the comments, or a summary of the comments, I guess, from the neighbors regarding construction impacts. I certainly respect those comments and the abutting property owners' desire to make sure there's no impacts to their building. So those are really construction and site plan details. So we will ensure that those are addressed through the site plan process and during construction. I had a brief conversation with the contractor today. They're certainly not expecting the use of cranes or any large equipment to facilitate this construction, and even vehicle construction trucks and so on will be quite modest. So I'm not expecting big impacts during construction, but that's kind of a building issue. What you have before you is the minor variance request. So hopefully you will agree that the request is minor and appropriate, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have them. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. Wendy.
Hi, Tracy. Yeah, this is, and I'll speak to my feelings on the minor variance when it's my turn, but with regard to the abutting property owners' questions, will you be responding to some of those? I know this is a minor variance meeting, but what's the process for addressing his concerns ahead of site plan, or do you plan to do that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I actually didn't see the specific questions. We just had a couple of sentences from staff saying there were some concerns. If it's the committee's wish with my client and the contractor, we could put something in writing to respond. I just kind of got high-level comments that there were some some concern to make sure that buildings were protected. So happy to respond.
I think there was some right-of-way questions, but I see Carl may be able to help us.
Jay?
Let Carl go on that, then I'll.
Okay, Carl.
Go ahead, Carl.
Yes, well, if it's the committee's direction, we can work on a response. The concerns that were outlined, to me weren't in opposition to the proposed minor variance, but I think they were understandable concerns from neighbors to ensure that the development is not going to impact their own investment. I did have a conversation with our chief building official before the meeting about some of the measures that are going to take place. So I can, if it's the committee's desire, I can work with Tracy on a response to the abutting property owners.
If I could just follow up, Mr. Chair.
Wendy?
We saw the value in the Lapine case of early discussions with the abutting property owners. So I think that worked out so well that my own suggestion would be that we get ahead of any of those things, such as the note we got today from one of the abutting property owners.
I have a thing here. At the rear of the property for control over the parking and the right-of-way, I think there should be a survey on there. Just for the respect and the condition of the abutting owners. Yes, Jay?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, this is totally in keeping with what we want. We want intensification. We want people living downtown. However, you know, the concerns of the property owner that we got today are valid. And I think that, you know, I agree with Councillor Alfred to be proactive and to make sure that it's just a functional thing about, you know, how this is going to take place. It's not a small project. I mean, it's an addition of a story. And so rightly so, they've got some concerns. My question is in looking at the site plan, is 7 William Street at play here at all?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So my client has purchased 7 William Street. It's not related to any construction as part of this application, but the intent is for 3 of the required parking spaces for this proposal to be located on the property at 7 William Street. So that's where the a parking agreement will come in so 3 parking spaces there, 3 on the subject property to meet the total of 6.
So
the reality
through the chair,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So through the chair, so 7 William, that building there, which is a vast plumbing, is that coming down then?
Through you, Mr. Chair, my client and his contractor have indicated it may be removed. There's no immediate plans to take it down. So not specific to this necessarily, but eventually it may be removed, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Jacqueline?
Mr. Chair, I have 2 questions. I guess the first one, just looking at an overview map of the properties. Property lines are a bit of a hodgepodge back there. So I agree a survey might be a wise choice, but for 7 William Street, it looked quite large in the backyard. Why was there not a consideration for the missing spaces? There's 3 basically on lease for 1723 Beckwith Street. Why couldn't they take 2 more to avoid a minor variance?
I don't really know the answer to that. I guess
I mean, I wouldn't want it to negatively affect the building at William Street. Obviously, it just looked like there could be room for that.
Yeah, so some of those spaces are obviously used by that building. I'm just scrambling for my notes, but I think there is 1 residential unit there at 7 William, so it's already using. Yeah, there's 1 residential unit, so we needed to retain, well, to comply with your bylaw, technically 2 parking spaces for that residential unit. And then there's some commercial space there as well. So we didn't want to take all of the parking from that building and leave that one deficient. So 3 spaces taken from the 5 that are there at 7 William. 3 would go with this project, and the 2 that are remaining at 7 William would need to stay with 7 William to meet its parking requirement for its existing residential use. So we can't really take more without creating a problem over there.
So, Mr. Chair, the second part of my question is just, we're talking cash in lieu for the missing commercial spaces. So how many commercial spaces are we talking about eliminating for Beckwith Street?
So the 3 existing spaces for the Beckwith Street property are considered commercial spaces right now. So all 3 of those would be converted to residential. So those 3 for sure would be a cash in lieu payment to the town.
Thank you.
This is the, this is the first time I've run into this cash in lieu. Now that's $750. Is that annually? Or is that a one-time payment? What's the background on that?
Carl?
Through the chair, cash in lieu of parking is a planning tool as provided for in the Planning Act and in our zoning bylaw, whereby somebody has and normally that goes straight through council with an agreement that that council authorizes, but it's a tool where the individual, if they can't provide the parking on site or within 150 meters, they would provide the municipality the rate at currently $750 per parking space on a one-time basis that goes into a parking reserve. And in the past, that parking reserve has been used for meter replacement, those sorts of things. But certainly with the removal of most of our meters, we'll be looking at other purposes for that. But ultimately, it is intended to improve the public parking supply in the downtown core. And if I may, I'd like to speak to the survey requirement as well. I think that's obviously a very, very important piece of this development. It is a very interesting parcel fabric and mix of right-of-ways and property lines to the rear there. And certainly as a site plan, as a condition of site plan or part of the site plan submission, we would be looking for a survey as well. And the other thing that would do is also confirm exactly where that neighboring, the property to the north with the former Vinnie's store, where exactly that lot line is between the applicant's property and the neighboring property vis-a-vis the wall. So if the wall encroaches slightly on the property or the other way around, that would inform decisions that the architect and the engineers would need to make in terms of working around those existing features. So that would certainly be all of which would be a part of the next stage of the development review process.
Thanks, Carl. Wendy?
Yeah, I in terms of this being a minor variance, I think it is indeed a minor variance. I agree with staff's recommendation. It is, as Councillor Brennan said, this is in line with council's goals and objectives with regard to housing, infill. Also, and Carl, I think you mentioned it, that it will make the facade of that side more attractive to have a second story, and it increases the housing stock. So I would support staff's recommendation for this.
Thanks, Wendy. Anyway, anything else? Jacqueline?
I think this is an interesting project. I think it's in regards to the actual development, it's very interesting. I'm in agreement with the development. It's that the residential parking component, I agree, is minor in nature. It's the commercial parking that concerns me. At what point are we at our threshold with relying on the municipal parking lot on Market Street? It's already well used. So for us to just say, "Oh, just go back there, just use that parking lot," at what point are we at capacity and just that it's full and there's no more parking?
Wendy?
Yeah, I don't disagree with Jacqueline's point, and I think the fund, the parking in lieu fund that we have, the reserve that we have, and I think you're right. At some point, we're going to have to say, maybe we need to put a second story on that parking lot at Market Street or find other downtown parking. But again, I don't think we're there yet. I think we'll know more when we've had another year or two post COVID. To know how our downtown is going to be. Things have changed since 2018. So I don't disagree with Jacqueline, but at some point there may have to be some other, like I say, put a second story on Market Street parking lot or something like that considered and planned for and budgeted for.
Thanks, Wendy. No, well, I had thought about the commercial part, like with renting a commercial unit in there, and I have no parking. I've got to park 4 blocks away or 2 blocks away to get to the place where I've rented out for my place of business. And that's the part I can't, that I can't see. And saying they can park here and park there, that doesn't make any sense to me. But Like, I don't know, like, I'd have to see with 7 William Street, I'd have to see what's actually used in there for commercial and what, I think the building is very small and it's right at the street level. So there's a fair bit of room back there behind the building that could accommodate like the three commercial spots that are already there. They wouldn't have to get rid of them. Like, is that the only building that, Carl, is that the only building, like is 7 William the only one that uses the parking at the back of that building?
I would direct that question to the applicant, or to Tracy, who I think would have a better understanding of the owner's business and his tenants and their parking needs.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if you're asking what, because I think there's other parking in there, but it's my understanding there are 5 parking spaces associated with the property at 7 William. So 2 would be dedicated for the single residential unit that's in that building, and the other 3 dedicated for commercial purposes, but my understanding is not really used for the same reason. I think that the spaces associated with the Beckwith Street property are not frequently used, just because they are tucked into the back. And for many of the customers, it's, you know, short-term parking, and they're using the streets and the parking lots that are nearby. So it's proposed to use 3 of those 5 spaces, which would be dedicated for residential purposes for this second story on the Beckwith Street property, 3 there and 3 on the Beckwith property.
Okay.
If I may just add, I suppose when, you know, if you make the decision favorable and we get to the site plan stage, and I agree with Carl, I don't know what the term Carl used, but the surveying, and there's a lot of little parts and things back in there, easements and parts. So surveying would probably make sense to kind of clarify exactly what's happening. And we might find that there's a little bit more room there. And I haven't measured out, but based on my understanding in the drawing, site plan drawing that was prepared by the architect, that's my understanding of what the current parking arrangement is in behind these buildings.
Thanks, Tracy. Any other questions?
Not a question, but I've been in behind there, and I think, as you were saying, John, there's several more parking spaces than, you know, I think what up here. And but as far as the survey, I go along with that 100%. I think that's something should be cleaned up. Those are my only concerns.
Well, I know there's a survey in Toronto Dominion Bank. I did it. And you can see that loop in by the parking spaces 1, 2, and 3.
Mm-hmm.
There's 2 parking spaces or 3 in there that the Toronto Dominion Bank own. And then they own the right of way that goes down around the building and out onto Beckwith Street. So anyways, is there any other questions? The committee is tasked in making a decision for this application under Section 45 of the Planning Act. If the committee is ready to do so, I will now entertain a motion for MV-21-03. Wendy,
So moved.
seconded by Jay. All in favor?
So,
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, were there opposed? Were there? I know it carried, but
Any opposed?
Yeah, I did.
Jacqueline opposed, okay. Thank you for attending and participating in the planning process of the application MV 2021-03. Any participants that have not signed in or required further notice of the application are asked to please reach out to the planning coordinator, Mary Remig, by phone at the town hall. Appeal rights as prescribed by the Planning Act will be outlined on the notice of decision. If you have any questions on this application or the process, I invite you to get in touch with our senior planner or planning coordinator. This concludes the public portion of the Planning Advisory Committee meeting. We will now move on to the next item on our agenda.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Item number 6, priority issues. Do we have any, Carl?
Well, we're just a quick bit of an update on the zoning bylaw review. We are going to be launching in August a zoning issues workshop that led by our consultants. It will, of course, be a virtual process, but we're going to be publicizing that within the next couple of weeks and just letting the community know what it is that we're looking to do and what we're looking for information on. The housing task force, the housing advisory committee, that's a new committee that was struck by council to implement the housing task force recommendations, has also asked that we fast track accessory dwelling provisions in the zoning review. So they've asked that we look at broadening the accessory dwelling provisions within a dwelling and outside the dwelling as required by the Planning Act, and they're looking to get zoning policies for that in their they're looking to get that in place before the rest of the zoning review is complete. So we're working through some of the mechanics for that, but we'll likely be holding a public meeting in September to consider proposed policy. So we don't have anything else to report at this point on that. So stay tuned for more information.
Thanks, Carl. Item number 7, correspondence items. We have none. Item number 8, project updates. Carl?
So just a couple of, we're working through a few multi-residential development site plan applications at the moment, and staff have recently been providing feedback to developers on the Block 1 Bellamy Farm apartment complex proposed by the Samir Group. The Kerfoot development, I think, as you know, on at Pursley and Lyra. The Lapine development on proposed for Elmsley. That report will be the zoning report will be going to council at the end of July, and then we've provided feedback on the first draft of the site plan, as well as most recently the site plan submission for 7 Maple, the old medical building. We provided feedback on that. So we're waiting for revised plans for that, but those, I think the developers hope to be starting all of those projects later on this year. So we might have some large projects to take to council for final approval in the coming months.
Thanks, Carl. Item number 9, next meeting. Planning Advisory Committee meeting, August the 12th, 2021. Do I have a motion for adjournment? Jay. Thanks, guys. Have a good evening.
Say go Habs for